Peace. Peace on earth. That's not the Dalai Lama speaking, not some spiritual leader at a meditation retreat. That's Donald Trump. New Year's Eve on December 31st, when reporters asked him what is his resolution for 2026, President Donald Trump said, peace. Peace on earth. 48 hours later, he bombs Venezuela.
The United States Armed Forces conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela. Overwhelming American military power, air, land, and sea, was used to launch a spectacular assault. And it was an assault like people have not seen since World War II. It was a force against a heavily fortified military fortress in the heart of Caracas to bring outlaw dictator Nicolas Maduro to justice. This was one of the most stunning, effective, and powerful displays of American military might and competence in American history.
Saturday morning, in the early hours, that was yesterday, Venezuelan capital Caracas goes dark. Not because of Venezuela's chronic power failures, but this time the United States military turned off the lights. Explosions were heard at Fort Tiuna, that's Venezuela's largest military complex. Miranda Air Base destroyed. La Guaira port burnt. Helicopters over the capital. Within hours, President Nicolas Maduro, an elected head of state, however corrupt, was blindfolded, zip-tied on the USS Iwo Jima and headed to New York. President Trump announced this from Mar-a-Lago in Florida at 4:30 a.m. in the US in the morning, like he's reporting a golf score. The United States of America has successfully carried out a large-scale strike against Venezuela. President Nicolas Maduro has been, along with his wife, captured and flown out of the country. And a few hours later, he addressed the media and the people. During his address, he did not say supported a transition. He did not say helped restore democracy. He just said captured, flown out. And then the line that should make every sovereign nation nervous. President Donald Trump said, we are going to run Venezuela. And then few hours later, Vice President J.D. Vance posts on social media, and then he says, quote unquote, the stolen oil must be returned to the United States. The stolen oil? Venezuela nationalized its oil industry in 2007, a sovereign right recognized under international law. Norway did it, Saudi Arabia did it, Mexico did it. But Venezuela did it. That was theft requiring military correction like this. This is not counter-narcotics. This is not regime change for democracy. This is the United States invading a sovereign nation to seize the world's largest oil reserves and saying it out loud. The peace president just started his third war in a week. Nigeria on Christmas Day. He had a war cry on Iran few hours before Venezuela, and now Venezuela yesterday. That was a defining New Year resolution indeed, right? Peace. So how did we get here? Because this did not start yesterday morning. Go back to early 2000s. Hugo Chavez nationalizes Venezuela's oil industry. American companies ExxonMobil, Chevron, and ConocoPhillips lose billions in assets and contracts. They have been waiting to get back in ever since. After the death of Hugo Chavez in 2013, Nicolas Maduro became the president. And in March 2020, the Trump administration charges Maduro with narco-terrorism, conspiracy to import cocaine, weapons violations, and then they put a $15 million bounty. This indictment is real. The charges are serious. Maduro indeed runs a corrupt regime with documented ties to drug trafficking. But those charges sat there for 4 years. Trump did not invade in 2020. And after that, President Joe Biden didn't invade. But everything changed in the last few months. The bounty increased $25 million in early 2025, then $50 million by August, making Maduro the highest value DEA target in history. You see, back in July 2024, Venezuela held a presidential election. The opposition won decisively. Tallies showed nearly 70%. However, Maduro claimed victory and refused to leave. Then the United States, European Union, and dozens of other countries called it a fraud. Later, President Donald Trump took office in January 2025. And by December 2025, he has assembled the largest armada in South American history. Not my words, it's President's words. 15% of the entire US Navy, the USS Gerald R. Ford, more than 10,000 troops and sailors, Venezuela was quote-unquote completely surrounded. Then comes the part that was absolutely cinematic. Late December into early January, Trump begins interdicting Venezuelan oil tankers. Not sanctioning, physically stopping them at sea. Some were boarded, some were seized, some were forced back to the port. And international media starts using a specific word called blockade. Blockades are not sanctions. Under international law, they are acts of war. I'll explain how effective this word is with one example. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, then US President John Kennedy specifically used the word quarantine for the same thing instead of blockade to avoid that legal designation. Everyone understood what a blockade meant. It is basically cutting off a nation's commerce by military force, and that is war. But Donald Trump didn't care. He interdicted tankers, seized vessels, and forced ships back. When Venezuela's government was sufficiently weakened, when the military was divided and demoralized, he struck. It's a classic textbook strategy. Starve them first, strike when they are weak, and then declare victory. In this case, the drug charges did not change. What changed was Trump's calculation that Venezuela was weak enough. The narco-terrorism charges provided pretext, the blockade provided tactical advantage, the invasion delivered the price. And what is that price? 300 billion barrels of oil. Let's talk about that oil. Venezuela sits on the world's largest proven oil reserves, 303 billion barrels. More than Saudi Arabia, that has 298 billion, more than Iran's 208 billion, more than Russia's 80 billion. The single biggest prize in the global energy game. Venezuelan oil is heavy crude, high in sulfur and difficult to refine. Most countries cannot process it economically, but American refineries on the Gulf Coast were specifically designed for it. For decades, Venezuelan oil flowed north, got refined in Texas and Louisiana, generated massive profits for these American oil companies. Then Chavez nationalized the industry. American companies lost access, lost contracts, lost billions of dollars. And now President Donald Trump didn't hide it. During his address, he said, and I quote, "We have the greatest oil companies in the world, the biggest and the greatest, and we are going to be very much involved in Venezuela's oil industry." He did not say Venezuela will rebuild. He did not say the Venezuelan people will benefit. He said we are going to be very much involved. And that phrase from J.D. Vance about stolen oil needing to be returned, it's not just rhetoric. It's a doctrine being established. If America can declare nationalized resources stolen and use force to seize them, what stopped this logic elsewhere? Bolivia's lithium? Chile's copper? India nationalized its banks in 1969 and again in 1980. And today, the key parts of India's energy sector are run by state-owned companies like ONGC, Indian Oil Corporation, and Oil India Limited. Decisions made through law, parliament, and democratic process. So if nationalizing Venezuela's oil is now being called theft, the obvious question is, what stops someone tomorrow from calling India's own nationalized assets stolen and demanding they be returned? The precedent? Your resources are not really yours if we want them and have the power to take them. Now the tactical piece. Venezuela's oil production had collapsed from 3 million barrels per day to barely 1 million. When you interdict the tankers carrying even that reduced output, you're dismantling the whole state from within. That is what happened in Venezuela. Government revenue collapsed, military could not be paid reliably, supply chains broke. This is siege warfare, a classic medieval strategy with 21st century naval power. And yesterday's strikes weren't the beginning, they were the final act. The blockade was the operation, the invasion was cleanup, 6 months positioning assets, conducting dry runs, interdicting vessels. Donald Trump publicly announced the Armada. He seized an oil rig in December, forced tankers back when the state was sufficiently weakened. Special forces landed under darkness. The Venezuelan military barely resisted because the blockade had already done the work. Let us be absolutely straight here. You don't conduct a 6-month naval blockade to arrest someone on drug charges. The indictment was a pretext, the blockade was strategy, and the oil, as I said, is the biggest prize. Now here, it is where it gets very much revealing, because someone gave Trump everything he could want, and he rejected her anyway. María Corina Machado, the woman who won Nobel Peace Prize and dedicated it to Donald Trump, called him, quote-unquote, a champion of freedom in this hemisphere. María Corina Machado, She is Venezuela's main opposition leader. She won the opposition primary by a huge margin, showing clear popular support. But the Maduro government barred her from running in the presidential election. So she backed a stand-in candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez. And when Venezuelans voted, opposition polling station tallies showed Gonzalez won nearly 70% of the vote. Yet Maduro declared himself the winner anyway, refused to release the transparent results. And since then, Machado has been in hiding for more than 15 months, facing the constant risk of arrest or even worse. However, in December 2025, a month ago, she somehow escaped to accept the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo, Norway. That was her first public appearance in a year. And that's when she was speaking to CBS News and she said, "I support President Trump's strategy." And when asked if she welcomed any US military action, she said, "I will welcome more and more pressure so that Maduro understands that he has to go." Those were her words. And she also spoke to President Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., and she made explicit oil promises. She said, "Forget about Saudi Arabia, we have more oil, massive privatization, and American companies would make a lot of money through Venezuela's infinite oil potential." Those were her words. A Nobel Peace Prize winner with a 70% of the vote promising to hand Venezuela's oil to American corporations. Everything Trump could want, wrapped in a democratic legitimacy. And during the press conference, Trump's response, quote unquote, "I think it would be very difficult for her to be the leader. She does not have the support or the respect within the country." The woman who won 70%, who earned the Nobel Prize, who promised him everything, and Trump says not enough support in her own country. Who might lead instead? Trump mentioned potentially working with Delcy Rodriguez, the current vice president of Venezuela. She is currently in Moscow. She is deeply implicated in regime corruption and human rights abuses for almost a decade. But why prefer Maduro's corrupt vice president over the Nobel Prize winning Democrat? I will explain. You see, Machado has actual popular support, international legitimacy, democratic credentials, plans for transitional justice and institutional rebuilding. That means she has a strong leverage in negotiations with American oil companies. She could drive a hard bargain. On the other hand, Delcy Rodriguez, she is desperate and isolated. She has no democratic mandate. She is facing potential prosecution. Therefore, she will accept whatever terms keep her out of prison. She is not a leader. She is a manager for American interests. Trump does not want a Venezuelan leader now. He wants a Venezuelan employee. And this Nobel Prize winner who offered everything still was not servile enough. We need to watch dramatic developments in the coming days. Who controls Venezuela's oil sector? That's the most important question. And if American companies announce major contracts soon, then it will be clear that all this was never about democracy or drugs. It was always about oil. And I strongly believe that this is going to happen. And does the Venezuelan military fracture or unify? You see, Defense Minister Pedrino Lopez condemned the attack. Interior Minister appeared with armed police, genuine resistance, or maybe positioning for deals. We will know. And what about Machado? And what does she do? Does she have any path to power? Or was she just political cover? We need to wait and watch her moves too. And the Latin American reactions. Brazil, Mexico, Colombia condemned it strongly. Will they take concrete action? Emergency meetings, security discussions, economic countermeasures, or just issuing statements? We need to watch how they will act, and we need to also watch how international community responds. And Trump's next move at his press conference, he said about Mexico. He said, something is going to have to be done with Mexico. Drug cartels, border security. You see, the pattern is very clear. Identify the problem, position assets, ignore international law, strike. Venezuela was a test case. Minimal military power, there was no nuclear weapons, no superpower backing. Trump invaded, seized the leader, announced resource seizure, faced zero meaningful consequences beyond diplomatic complaints. If there are no costs, there will be more coming. This isn't just about Nicolas Maduro. Yes, he is corrupt. Yes, he stole an election. Yes, he runs a brutal regime. None of that is in dispute. But this operation is not about punishing Maduro. It's about establishing how the world works now. Sovereign nations do not truly own their resources if a superpower wants them badly enough. That's proved. Elections do not matter if the winner is not compliant enough. International law applies only to countries too weak to ignore it. When the country that wrote the rulebook for international order tears it up and publicly announces it's taking what it wants, then what's left here? One military operation in Caracas reveals what we maybe always knew but did not want to admit. The international order was always built on power, not principle. The rules only mattered when the powerful nations chose to follow them. Venezuela is just the moment we stopped pretending. In the next episode, I will dig more into it. We dig into what this precedent means for Russia, China, and every country that challenged Western dominance. The rules-based order is dead. Then what's next? I'll see you in the next episode. Please leave comments and let us discuss in the comment section. I want to know what your thoughts are on this development in geopolitics. And please subscribe to my channel. It won't cost anything, and you will get an in-depth analysis and case studies on geopolitical issues. Thank you so much. Jai Hind.